Welcome back to Evelina Beauty's Life is Beautiful. Today, I am so excited to share with you. We are having a really great conversation about sex. We have renowned therapist and psychologist, sex therapist and psychologist, Dr. Carolin Klein here with us today. And she is an educator. She has her PhD in clinical psychology from the University of British Columbia. She is the co-owner and co-director of the West Coast Center for Sex Therapy, a center that provides evidence-based sex therapy to people throughout British Columbia. She is going to chat with us today. We're going to have an incredible conversation, and I know you're going to learn so much and how to bring more joy through sex to your life. So thank you so much for being here today. I'm thrilled to have you and so excited to have this conversation.
I'm equally thrilled to be here. Thank you.
So, tell me what inspired you, or what led you into this line of work? How did you become, and why did you want to become a sex therapist?
I didn't intend to become a sex therapist. I didn't even know that actually existed. So whenever I get asked that question, I always say to people that it was a combination of curiosity and complete fluke. From a curiosity standpoint, I was a pretty typical teenager, and I definitely was curious about sexuality and the way people thought about it. I definitely grew up as a young woman hearing the messaging around sexuality, that it could destroy a woman's reputation, don't want it too much, be sexually desirable, but don't be sexual, be a real lady, which implies, don't express too much sexuality. So I had a lot of curiosity about sexuality, among other things, but I thought I was going to pursue a degree in law. And so I attended the University of British Columbia, and in my first year, you're forced to fill your schedule, and I looked like everyone does for easy courses that looked interesting. And I saw Psychology 100, Intro Psych, and I thought that seems kind of easy and interesting. So I signed up, and I ended up loving it. I thought it was so interesting how human beings work, what we think about, how we think, how we interact. And so by the end of the full year, I sort of was like rethinking, do I really want to go into law? And I approached my professor and I said, if I did want to pursue a career in psychology, what's the next step? And he said, well, you'd have to do a master's and a PhD, and that's really competitive. So you're going to have to start volunteering in research labs and getting involved in research. And my next question was, do you have a research lab? And his lab was a sexual psychophysiology and neuroendocrinology lab. So at the end of my first year, I started volunteering in that lab, and he and his graduate students were doing really interesting research, and I fell in love with it. And he ended up becoming my master's and PhD supervisor, and the rest is history.
Oh, that's amazing. So you figured it out fairly quickly once you started your university track, that was
still
what
not
intrigued
sex therapy.
you.
I thought just psychology, but then as I started to
led you into
get involved in sex research, I really became fascinated. So much is changing in how we think about sex, gender, culture, the generation to which people were born. And so I thought there's so much here. It's not sort of a stale area of psychology. And I just became more and more curious.
And I guess that's an interesting point about like the era that we were born in, like our grandparents and our parents. Like, I think my mom's experience was, like you don't have sex outside of marriage and things that were taboo, which she brought forward to us. And then, but even our own kids too, like social media and how that's impacting their perception is, so again, very different. Yes. So very impactful, the era that everyone's growing up in and how that influences their perception.
Huge. I mean, my daughter is now 11, and in school, in her grade 1 class, they had 3 stuffed animals, and one was a she, one was a he, and one was a they. And like, these are different things we never thought about before. I have clients come into my office and they use terms, and I say, you have to educate me. That was not part of my university training. Decades ago. So.
I think that's what's hard for our generation is we don't, the gender pronouns is such a new, it's not that new anymore, but that was not what we grew up with. So for us, that's new. And you're right. Learning and being educated and being respectful is where for, I have a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old. It's very natural to them.
Yes.
That's the context. That's the lens.
Yes.
And I know my own personal upbringing was, we just didn't talk about sex. Yeah. You didn't have sex until you were married. And then you didn't talk about it. And even after being married, we still don't talk about it, or with my mom, we still don't talk about it. So there is a lot of perceptions. There's a lot of how we were brought up that I'm sure all your clients are bringing to you when they come and see you.
Yes, it really is this like completely opposite messaging. One is we don't talk about it, and the other is people are getting strong messages about it all the time. Again, the idea of be a lady, for example, or for a man, be a man. And the idea of his manhood is associated with his sexuality. Like on the one hand, we don't talk about it. And on the other hand, the messages are coming loud and clear all the time.
Yeah, how ironic, right?
Yes.
That there's both happening. And then you're trying to deal with both. Yeah, like don't have sex till you're married, but then once you're married, you better be good at it.
That's right.
That's your
now making
responsibility.
And,
So it's kind of like, how do you change that perception? So what is the and maybe there's not a most common. Is there a most common problem that you see that people are coming, or is it just a myriad of issues and it's hard to identify sort of one overarching issue?
Yeah, it's a really great question. My answer is a little bit by age, actually. If people are in a partnership and it's turning into a longer term partnership, especially post moving in together, post kids, the most common problem is desire discrepancies, where one partner would really like more sexual intimacy than the other. And that can be heightened when having children or going through the menopausal transition. If it's young adults, I only work with adults, but if it's young adults, we're tending to see a lot of distress, sexual shame that might be in females around, is it normal that they don't orgasm through penetration? In males, are they supposed to last as long as what's being depicted in pornography? Because again, no one talks about it. So they see these images of people having sex and no one's telling them, that's fiction. That's not real.
Right. That's the only model we're seeing, then it's like, well, that's the way it is.
Correct. So it depends a bit about age. And then a lot of my older couples who are facing now the empty nest, it's about how do we evolve our intimacy into something even more beautiful? We have the time and space for it. So the issues vary based on age.
That's interesting. So probably I would guess that majority of our audience is maybe in the middle or empty nesters. So maybe let's talk a little bit more about that. So for a woman who has just experienced a life change. So whether that's having a baby, being pregnant, having a baby, after having a baby, and all those body image things that come attached to that, hormonal things that come attached to having a baby, and desire and energy. You're tired, you're taking care of a baby. So maybe can we talk a little bit about what advice would you have for that woman who's pregnant or postpartum and struggling with managing all those changes?
This is something that I think I could talk probably for a good hour just on this question, so I'll try and keep it brief. I think one piece of advice I have for people is to just normalize that your desire for sexuality is probably going to go down when you have a little one. And I always say to people, like, we've only had birth control for 60 plus years, some parts of the world, not even. Our brain doesn't know that we have birth control, meaning that our brain is just thinking, wow, I have to keep this human being alive. I need lots of resources for it, be that breast milk, be that time and energy. So the brain sort of is like, do not have sex and have another baby right now, or I'm not going to have enough resources for this one. And it's, of course, so understandable that partners want to reconnect. That's beautiful. But accessing that sexual desire when you're still breastfeeding, that's sometimes a tall ask, because your brain is right now focused on keeping a human being alive. I always joke with my clients of like, nobody wants the emergency room physician to be thinking about sex while they're trying to save someone's life. But that's the equivalent of when you're a new parent, you're actually responsible for someone's life. It's normal for your brain to not want sex. But as you're saying, it's also that the relationship to one's body often changes. The parts of your body that were previously for pleasure and sensuality, as the comedian Ali Wong says, now it's a human cafeteria. And, and your body has changed, and not always in ways that you wanted it to change. And you're having to work on that. Like you're saying, you're tapped out. Sometimes I've got clients and they've got 3 young children and they're all hanging on to mom or whoever it is. And I say, your bucket for touch, it is like overflowing.
Yeah.
You do not need another
Absolutely.
person touching you. You actually need individuation. You need space. And again, so understandable that partners sometimes are not having kids clamoring the same way and they still want that touch. So I really validate both sides. But I think there's a lot that changes. And we sometimes have the expectation that sex should be the static. And people grieve it a lot when it's not. And including again into the older years when things start to change. But us recognizing it is going to ebb and flow and that that's normal. The concern for me as a sex therapist is, do patterns start to happen that once you are sleeping through the night, you're not breastfeeding anymore, you've been able to shower, is it now that a pattern's been established that sex is completely deprioritized and we don't want to swing the pendulum completely to the other side either.
So there is a point that perhaps, like I love what you're saying, to give, in this environment, in this situation, the woman permission to be like, it's okay. It's okay to not have strong desire right now. You've gone through a lot. There's body changes, hormonal changes. You're caring for this small child and that's enough. But that at some point, whenever that is, and obviously it's different for every person, that maybe it is a conversation that, okay, yes. How do you, and I think that's an interesting point too, where you're in a routine now and yeah, it's not a priority. So how then, so what advice is it at that stage where it's like, how do you make it a priority? And I think speaking for myself, as women get older too, and you're juggling a career, you're back to work now, you're juggling a career, you're still juggling a lot of household responsibilities in most cases. And then laundry or whatever else. And then, your husband's like, okay, let's go. And you're like, dude, I have had a full day. This is one more thing. So I think in both cases, my question is like, how do you create time or make it a priority and to facilitate that joy? Because sometimes I think you just feel like I've given all day to everybody else.
Yes.
So I just want to Netflix.
Yes.
And not chill, just Netflix.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. So, I think there's a few, and you really highlight them really, really well. I think there's a few things. One is that many couples, once they live together, they do stop prioritizing their time together because they take it as for granted that we're just in the same space. And a lot of times people come in with this idea that sexuality should be this spontaneous thing. And that's a beautiful idea. It's nobody's reality. When you first start dating someone, most people get asked out on a date on a Tuesday to go out on a Friday. And from that moment on, they're thinking, what am I going to wear on Friday? Is my nice underwear clean? I need to have time to get home and have a shower. And I'm going to brush my teeth and I'm going to do my face. I'm going to smell good. And then we're going to go out for dinner and we're going to flirt and we're going to kiss a little bit. And none of that was spontaneous. So what happens?
It feels like it is.
It feels like it because you've just been daydreaming about it.
Been thinking about it all week.
Yeah, and prepping yourself so that you feel in the mood to be touched. You have your shower, you shave your legs, whatever it is people do. And so what happens now is once people live together, even before kids are in the mix, is people start to sort of wait for it to fall from the sky. And the reality of our social relationships is it tends to be planned activities. Nobody shows up at my door unannounced. My girlfriends don't show up and are like, Carolyn, we want to go for dinner now. Do you want to go? And that's unfortunately what a lot of people do with sex. It's like, hey, you in the mood right now? And the probability that your partner's in the mood right now under the conditions that you just said of you're doing laundry, you're making kids lunches, all of that is so antithetical to having sex on your mind. So I always say to people, if sexual intimacy is important for you and for the connection in your relationship, you're going to have to set those date nights. And I do clarify that's not the same thing as putting in the calendar 6 p.m. pants off, we have to go. That's not hot. That's not what we did early on in dating. But it does mean saying that night, we're not going to watch 5 episodes of Game of Thrones. We are going to each go and have a shower. And it doesn't mean pressure to have sex, but we're going to be ready in case we want to. We're going to actually look at each other while we eat and not at our phones. We're going to actually sit on the couch, not with you on that one because you get to stretch out your legs and me on this one because I get to curl up, but actually together again. And so it's setting the stage to say, this is important. Let's see where this goes.
So you're basically saying in your therapies that sexual intimacy begins before sex.
Correct.
Let's set here's the plan.
Yeah.
Here's the roadmap. And we need to plan for it when you're at that stage in your relationship. Because you're right. I think people just think it's going to happen.
Yes.
And then it doesn't happen. And then you can get in bad habits or it's just not a priority. And I think why should, again, asking for a friend, why should a woman who's so busy, why what's in it for her to make it a priority? Like, why should she make it a priority? Because sometimes it does feel like it's one more thing on the list. So why is it important to plan and to make this a priority?
Yeah. My answer is it may or may not be. For some people, though, they start to feel like roommates when they don't have it anymore. They later on say, I don't feel as connected to my partner. And so for some people, sexual intimacy is a really strong form of connection. And so my question to them is that important to you? If that's important to you, then even though sex is not on your mind right now, like it's no different than us with our kids, right? It's not important for me to go to Science World, but it's really important for me to connect with my daughter and do activities where we actually are exploring and doing new things. And for many people, I say sex is where adults play. And this is the space for them to feel like this is about us. It's not being entertained by anybody else but ourselves. So for many people, it's critically important. For other people, though, and some it's because they're having really bad sex. For some, there isn't anything in it for them. And they actually end a sexual encounter feeling even more disconnected, feeling like, why did we bother? I wish I had slept. I felt like I was just objectified. It didn't feel good. It led to pain, whatever it might be. And in those cases, I would never want to give the message of you should just keep doing more of that. But I think for many people, sexual intimacy is about connection and feeling close to their partner.
I love the comparison to what we would do or the time we spend with our children.
Yeah.
You know, that is a great metaphor because you're right. We don't need to go to Science World again, but we do it for our kids. And we do it so much easier, I think, when it's for our kids.
Yes.
Like I will take my kids to the doctor the minute there's something wrong with them. And thankfully I'm pretty healthy. I don't have to go to the doctor. But when it's for me, it's like, oh, when am I going to fit that in? Yeah. So that's a great way to compare it, I think. That's relatable. But your answer actually, I'm curious in sex therapy. So when a couple's having intimacy and it's not great, in sex therapy, do you actually talk about that as well? Like tips and techniques and things to do to improve. You're having sex and it's not great, to improve it as well.
Yeah, 100%. Not necessarily in the way that people might think. It's not that we're doing, sort of a technique class in sex therapy. Although I will say, as a little aside, so I'm a registered psychologist, so I've got a very strict code of conduct of what I can do. But sex therapists, that's a general term that anyone can call themselves. And I'm sure there are some people doing all sorts of fun little workshops.
Yeah, I think there is.
I don't do those. But what I will talk to people about, and usually it's, when we do couple sex therapy, we always have one individual session at the start with each person so that I can really ask some very direct questions and see, is part of what's leading sometimes to a lack of desire or motivation for sex, that the sex is not very rewarding. And unfortunately, I do see a biased sample of people who are having pretty mediocre sex, not with anyone's bad intention, but because we grew up in this culture that doesn't talk about sex. So people are not very good about saying, I saw that in porn, so I feel like I'm supposed to like it, but I don't actually like it.
Right.
Or saying, I used to love that pre-kids, but now when you touch me in that way, it actually feels like how my daughter's touch is, like I don't want it. People are not actually talking enough to make sure their sexuality evolves along with them. And so a lot of people are doing sex in a way that actually is very mechanical. It's very scripted. We use that term in sex therapy of scripted sex. It's always at the end of the night, you brush your teeth, you wash your face, you lie there, and then you kiss, and then you touch, and then there's a bit of oral, and then there's penetration. And it's not about, hey, like, what do you actually want to do? It's the opposite of how our kids play, where they're like, what do you want to do today? Should we do it this way? Should we that? And so they've lost that ability to communicate and adapt. So a lot of it is getting them to start to feel comfortable saying, what do you want more of? What is really hot for you now at this phase of your life? What have you maybe never tried before and you're afraid, but this is now intimacy because you're actually talking to the person that you want to accept you the most, and you're actually sharing the stuff that's most vulnerable. So we get them to talk about it. And if they say, I don't know how to do that, then there's plenty of beautiful books, websites, resources that I can direct them to.
Oh, that's amazing. So again, it kind of comes back to communication, comes back to talking about this sort of taboo topic, being comfortable, talking about your needs, your preferences, things you like. Let's explore together, being curious. And obviously in a relationship, it's safe, or presumably it's a safe place to be having those conversations.
If it's not, then we're not even talking about sex therapy. We're talking about relationships.
Yeah, then that's another conversation.
Correct.
And so for a woman who's in that next phase, of their life, empty nesters, menopause, libido isn't as high because of hormones. What kind of advice or recommendations do you suggest for someone in that phase of life?
Yeah. I mean, the thing with the menopausal transition, which thankfully is getting a lot of attention now, I think women are getting more information that women deserve to have, centuries ago. The thing with the menopausal transition is we really see kind of two buckets of people. For some, going through menopause is a beautiful entryway into the freedom of I don't have periods anymore and I can just, and the kids are grown up and they're out of the house. And for some, they thrive. And just in case anyone in your audience loves reading, Dr. Peggy Klein-Platz from Ottawa, researcher. She's got a beautiful book called Magnificent Sex based on her years and years of research on is it true that your best sex years are behind you when you were younger? Does sex always go downhill as you age? And her research is very clear of absolutely not. Some of the best sex that people are having is as they move out of the responsibilities and roles of parenthood. And that coincides with, maybe you've gone through menopause and it doesn't mean the death of your sex life. But on the other hand, again, I see the bias sample where people are struggling. And one of the big things that I say is make sure you're finding a doctor who really takes this seriously, that if you're not feeling good in your body, if you are experiencing the dryness that comes with the drop in estrogen and sex is now painful, we need to treat that or you're never going to have a great sex life. If you are struggling with hot flashes and the worst idea is to have someone hot lying on top of you, we need to help you with that. If you're not sleeping well, your brain is going to say, I just want to sleep. I don't want to have sex. And that's valid. So I think the first piece is if people are struggling, let's make sure they're getting the right support for that and that they're finding a doctor who can help them with that. Beyond that, though, if we've taken care of that, now it is right back to communication, prioritization. What do you guys want this to look like? What is really beautiful intimacy and what's getting in the way of that? How can we help you to create that? And if that is giving permission, if that is creating time in your schedules, if that is being more creative, any of those are going to be really important for those couples.
I love that answer. That's a great answer. And I love the first step, especially we know so many women going through menopause, peri are struggling with all of those things. So again, I love that it's not making the woman wrong, because I think we tend to be like, well, there's something wrong with me. I don't want sex, or I don't want enough sex, or my husband wants more, or my partner wants more. And so I think it's common to internalize that. So I love that answer that you're looking at what's actually going on and how can we help with that, because that's going to transcend to potentially improving your sexual relationship, your intimacy. Again, if that's what you want.
Exactly.
Because it's true. It's hard. I think there's a lot of demands on women to do and be everything.
Yes.
Which is impossible. And there are things that sometimes aren't being addressed or talked about, or, you hear so often women having a hard time finding the right doctor that's going to actually acknowledge what's happening. And that is changing. It seems like there's a lot more support than there was, as you said. But I love that that's your approach, because these transitions are real and they're hard.
Yes, they are.
Really hard
especially
to navigate.
When people don't talk about it and people are navigating it alone.
I have a question, and we have talked about this before, about sex and parenting. Mm-hmm. And I specifically, I mean, how to talk about it with your children. And I think I know personally that's a challenge. I grew up we didn't talk about sex, except that you did not have it until you were married. And even now, we don't talk about sex. So I've never really had a great model of talking to my children about sex. At school, they have sex education. We've talked about it a little bit. But what advice or recommendations, suggestions do you have to support parents and talking about sex with their children? And when is that appropriate? When does that happen? What are what are good messages? Can you share a little bit or talk a little bit about that?
I'm so thankful you asked the question, because I do think it's really important. And as a parent myself, it's become even more important. What I'm about to say goes against what most people have been brought up to think, but thankfully I've got tons of research to back me up with this. And that is that the research is really, really, really clear that the sooner we talk to kids about sex and the more they know, the better choices they make. Specifically, in countries that have really comprehensive sex education and where it is normalized at home to talk about, for example, the Netherlands, way lower rates of teen pregnancies, way lower rates of STIs. And if parents don't want their kids to have sex, the best way to do it is talk to them about sex to death. I always joke that my daughter's going to be 65 before she has sex because she knows so much, because it actually shows that kids, instead of being curious of what's this thing I know nothing about, they instead say, I don't want it under these conditions. They know enough about it to actually say, this is not how I want to do this. And they make better decisions and they delay their onset to starting to be sexual. So what I say is I try and treat sex like everything else. So my daughter, when she was little, again, she's 11 now, but when she was little, she'd walk, we'd be driving and we'd pass a billboard and she'd say, like, what's that? And I would answer in a way that was developmentally appropriate, but I would never say to her, why are you asking me that? Who told you about that? I would never respond in that way. Or I wouldn't say, you know what? That's not something we talk about. That would never be my answer. I would talk about whatever image of food or whatever was on the billboard. So same thing. As my daughter grew up, she really got the message that we can talk about anything. And she would ask a question. I remember a long time ago, there was this Taylor Swift song when she still loves Taylor Swift, but she was really into Taylor Swift. She was young. And she asked this question about it. And I answered. And I said, well, that was, from my understanding of a time when Taylor Swift, when someone touched her without asking if they were allowed to touch her. And my daughter said, well, where did they touch her? And I said, well, I don't know exactly, but I think they put their hand up her skirt. And she said, they touched her bum? And I said, well, it might be her bum, might be her vulva. I don't know. Why would they want to touch her bum? And then we really talked about, like, sometimes people will steal toys. She saw that with her friends. Some people will steal things in a restaurant, and sometimes people will touch other people without asking permission, and that's not okay. And that if that ever happened to her, that I hope she would let me know, and that it's always okay to say no. And we had this beautiful conversation, and the next minute she said, Mom, can we stop and get a popsicle? Like, it was like she didn't care about it anymore, everything else. And so it's become so natural for her to ask a question and to have it answered. And the big thing I'll wrap up with answering this question on is, like, we have a bigger responsibility than ever before to talk to our kids about sex, because for the first time in history, kids are learning about sex by watching people have sex. When I grew up and porn was not readily available, internet was just kind of coming around the corner, people maybe would find an older brother or father's Playboy magazine. Maybe they'd hear about it from an older sibling or cousin, but they weren't watching it. And now the average age that kids are seeing pornography is around age 11, my daughter's age.
Wow.
And I know with my nephew, when he was 11, because he knew I did something to do with sexuality, he actually said to me, a friend showed me this video, and it was pornography. And so if we're not talking to kids about sex, they are going to learn about it through pornography, and they are going to think that those images are real and what they should be doing, what they should like or not like. And pornography is, again, it's great if you want to have your brain kind of flooded with kind of like, ooh, this is really titillating, but it's terrible for sex education because it's fictional. It's like growing up on The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. That's not how most people live. So I think we have a real responsibility to just talk matter-of-factly with our kids and to say, yeah, this is what that is. What do you think about that?
That's a great point, and that's scary. I have a 13-year-old boy, and I've never asked him if he's seen pornography. So I guess I need to have that conversation. I better get talking to my kids. Probably.
Yes.
Jeez. Okay, well, thank you. I really appreciate your candor about that, because I think it's probably a conversation more parents, including myself, need to have to help. So that's great. Thank you. I want to shift gears back to women and the women you work with and talk a little bit about body image. Mm-hmm. Because again, I mean, we're here at Evelina to try to really help women, celebrate women for who they are, how they are, and yeah, we want to help them feel great and feel like the best version of themselves, but also be accepting for who they are. And we still see so much social media and imaging. This is how you're supposed to be. And even now as women are aging, all this plastic surgery and, women who are, 65 that look like their daughters because of the work they've had, which I think is also very concerning. But obviously body image and how it affects sex and how it affects intimacy if a woman's not feeling good about how she looks and her body. So how is that a common problem that comes forward, and what suggestions or thoughts do you have or recommendations for a woman who's struggling with her body image and also perhaps struggling with sexual intimacy?
Yeah, you're right. The two come into my office tied together, struggling with sexual intimacy and struggling with body image. And the sad truth is, for every minute that I try and talk to women about their body image and change their perception, they're having 3,000 minutes fired at them that are telling them that they don't look as good as the other people in social media, that they don't compare, that something's wrong with them, that they should do more for their bodies, be it plastic surgery, etc. So we unfortunately are right now, more than ever before, flooded by messages of not being enough and these comparisons. It's really hard. What I do like to share with my clients, and I especially love it when a male partner is there, if we're talking to women, because the male partners will always 100% like nod their heads, is as they're struggling with their body image, which again, sometimes is so valid. Like women's bodies go through a lot with pregnancy, childbirth, menopause. Like we get put through the ringer.
We do. I remember after having labor, I felt like a truck had run over me. It was like, nobody's coming around here. It's a lot. And thanks for acknowledging that, because I think that's not acknowledged enough.
No.
Men's bodies do not go through the same changes that ours do.
Absolutely not. And not in these quick time frames. So I really do understand why body image can be such a tricky thing. But here's what I love to tell women, again, especially if their male partners are present, is I say, and it's going to sound like I'm going off on a tangent, but it's completely linked. I always say to them, can I tell you about what happened when amateur porn came on the market? So in case your viewers don't know, so amateur porn is porn that is of people who are not paid professionals and they're just filming themselves. And when amateur porn came on the market, what shocked everyone, including us sex therapists, was that it started to get outviewed completely compared to professional porn. That didn't make sense. Why would we want to watch people with not perfect bodies? Why would we want to watch people where it's not airbrushed, where it's not spliced, and, people with huge breasts, huge penises, whatever it might be? Why are people watching everyday ordinary people? And most people can guess it. The answer is because it seems so real. And what's real is the enthusiasm. And I always say, isn't that interesting that people, especially men, would rather watch not perfect bodies, but feel like, wow, that woman wants to be there. She's really having pleasure, rather than prioritizing the perfect body. And I say, as you get stuck on your body image, you're no longer present with your partner. Your enthusiasm is not real because you're worried about, oh no, are you touching my love handle? Oh no, have my breasts, started to relax a little, whatever it might be. So I'm saying to them, we need to get you back to knowing that who cares what your body looks like? Your enthusiasm is so much more important. And we've put such a focus on body image, and it's the wrong thing to put the focus on in sexuality. I really can't remember ever having a man say to me, if only she was 5 pounds lighter, I would have enjoyed the sex more. Never have I heard that. But I've often heard men say, I just want her to have a good time and I can't tell. And I just wish she were more enthusiastic. I wish she didn't care so much about turning off the lights, being under the blanket, keeping her shirt on. All of that is getting in the way of two people actually just being together.
Yeah. I mean, it's a shame, but it's reality, right? That women face. And it's not something men talk about or struggle with so much, body image, but it's so prevalent amongst women. So women need to know that, the men aren't as concerned.
That's right.
That's
right.
But there's so many layers to unpacking that. It's tough.
Yeah. And that it's not a given that body image and sexuality go together, because if you look at men as a generalization, if men get offered like, oh, their partner would like to perform oral sex on them or whatever, men aren't sort of like, but I think I kind of have a man belly, maybe not today. Men are like, that sounds amazing, even though they might know their body doesn't look as good as it did 10 years ago. So men have this beautiful ability, and it's in part because they don't get the same messaging around their bodies and what it means for how desirable and important they are. But we need to disentangle body image from sexuality. The two don't have to coexist.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about social media and eras. This era, I mean, really, there's so much technology, dating apps, social media. How has that changed our experience of intimacy?
Huge. It's interesting because now you're seeing a lot more talk in the media right now around the idea of, are we in a sexual recession? And that some data has come out, although some of it's conflicting, but overall the data is showing that, especially for the Gen Zers, people post 2010, that we really started to see this drop in young adults, how much sex they're having. And that's even true for older adults, but it's particularly predominant for the Gen Zers. And it seems to be that one of the big reasons is the social media usage, that many people, and I can think of even my niece and nephew who are in that age bracket, they are spending lots of weekends at home with their friends online in different places. They're not even together anymore. And on one hand, there's an upside. They're not all gathering at some house party, drinking and getting into crazy trouble. But on the other hand, they are not connecting the same way. And for partnerships, what I always say is, you might think that it's just the two of you in the relationship, but you've actually invited a third and a fourth in with your devices. As Esther Perel, the famous relationship therapist, sometimes says, and I think she says it so beautifully, she says, is the last thing you stroke before you fall asleep your device? And is the first thing you stroke when you wake up in the morning your device? And do you do that with your partner lying right beside you? We have replaced turning to our partners for our entertainment, for our play, our devices. And again, it's very tricky because you can't compete. Netflix has new things on it all the time. And if, again, people are going to have more scripted sex where it's end of the night, last thing they do, same order, like there, it's like, well, I can do that tomorrow night, but this Netflix show is going to be removed soon. I better get to that. So we have to make sure that we're very thoughtful in how much time we spend on our devices and know they have become the third or the fourth in the relationship.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. There's another whole conversation, right? Devices and how they dominate everything, and especially with our kids. But interesting how, of course, they're going to impact intimacy and all of our relationships.
Yes.
Is there, for anyone who is single or in a long distance relationship, what kind of advice do you share with them for cultivating intimacy?
Yeah. I mean, I'll say first for the single, I think that we still have a lot of stigma around being single. Thankfully, that's diminishing. Less people are getting married, cohabitating, and there's lots of debate, is that a good thing or not a good thing? But I think, again, just because you're single does not mean you can't have beautiful connections in your life. And the big thing is that we do know, again, quoting Esther Perel, that the quality of our lives is determined by the quality of our relationships. So what I would say is people do need to get off their devices. People need to be willing to get out and connect. We do see that the research shows that in-person connection is more powerful than over a Zoom session, et cetera. So my big advice is get out. But if it's back to the long distance relationship, get back to communicating. Spend time talking to each other. Intimacy is not just physical touch. It's also like, how much do we show curiosity and interest in another person? How much do we let them into our lives, into our inner thoughts? So it comes down to communication. It comes down to getting out there and trying to connect in the best ways you can.
That's great. Is there a simple practice, and you may have just answered this in terms of connection, but like that people can start today to improve their connection with their partner?
Yeah, the simplest one would be talk, but I know for many people that's not simple. For many people that actually feels really anxiety provoking. So I'll answer it in a different way. I often say to my clients, if you guys have been together for a long time and you want to somehow bring in more novelty, because as soon as you bring in more novelty, you have more to talk about, it's going to be easier to have a different experience. I always say play around with the five senses. Like, you don't have to swing from the chandelier, but it is so different to be sexually intimate if you are listening to Enya versus Nine Inch Nails versus an African drum beat versus dirty talk versus sweet sensual talk versus dead silence because your in-laws are on the other side of the paper mache wall, that's going to lead to a different tempo, a different intentionality. So I say to people, play around with the five senses. Sometimes put 20 candles in your room. Other times, put the camera on, even if you never watch it, it's just going to change how you show up and what you do. So I think if it's an easy trick, I would say play around with that, and you're going to have a very different experience with your partner to get out of that scripted sex.
That's actually a great segue, because before we began today, I was telling you when you spoke at an event we organized a few years ago, you had a great analogy that my girlfriends loved. So I'm going to ask you to share it because it is that sentiment of variety. But tell us the story about I don't want to have sushi every night.
Yeah. So, I mean, I say that our brains treat sex just like everything else. It's just society that doesn't treat it the same. And so I say our brains, like when it comes to desire, it's a bit like sushi. And sushi is one of my favorite foods. And I say, if I get really lucky and I win a gift certificate or a contest for my favorite sushi restaurant, they're going to deliver sushi to my house every night for the next 3 years. I say, guess how many nights it takes before I'm not craving sushi anymore? Not very long. And the problem is for many people, the sushi restaurant has a very narrow menu. They've narrowed things down to the Kappa cucumber rolls. It is the same thing in the same order every single time. So we're not going to have a lot of desire for it. So I always say to people, like, make sure the sushi menu has tons on it, the teriyaki and the tempura and the gyoza and everything. And so that is my sushi analogy, is like, we have to make sure it's high quality sushi, and we have to make sure there's a lot of variety within it for our brain to want it.
I love that. It's my favorite. My girlfriends loved that comment. So looking ahead, what advice do you hope our listeners would you like to share when it comes to embracing life changes with more confidence and joy?
Yeah. It's hard to think of one piece of advice, but I think overall it's like, what we talked about before, it is normal to struggle, to have ebbs and flows in your desire, in what feels good in your body and what you want. But B, that again, our connections are really important for our quality of life. So don't let it fall down to the bottom of the priority list. Don't leave sex the last thing you do. I don't think anyone lies on their deathbed and says, you know what, I'm so glad I always did the dishes first and checked my email first and made sure everything was perfect. I think a lot of people will lie on their deathbed and say, I wish I just sometimes shoved the dishes in the oven and dealt with them tomorrow, and instead spent more time with my kids, my partner, myself, etc. So my big advice is, think really thoughtfully about what's important to you. Make sure you're not trying to do it all, but pick the things that are really important and structure your life around that. And if it includes intimacy and you're struggling, consider seeing a sex therapist, because that's what we are here for.
Yeah, that's great. So I have a couple questions, fun questions to wrap up. As you know, Evelina Beauty is a beauty brand. So we like to ask all our guests to share some of their beauty secrets. So one question is, what would be the one beauty product if you were on a deserted island and you can bring one thing? What would be the one beauty product that you would bring?
I don't know if it is in a humid climate or if it's dry. If it's a dry climate, definitely moisturizer. My skin is dry. But if it's humid, then it's going to be the mascara, because I have no eyelashes if I don't put mascara on them, being a blonde.
I am obsessed with my lashes too. That would probably be I would bring an eyelash curler, actually. I like to curl my eyelashes. I love that. And do you have any, like a beauty hack? Like, is there anything, a beauty hack, a beauty ritual, or something that you do that you can share?
Okay, I'm going to stay professional. I'm going to say it's not something necessarily, I'm not going to personalize. I'm going to say, here's my recommendation for people, is be sexual. Because as you are sexual and having arousal and orgasms, you are increasing blood flow to all parts of your body, including your face. It is great for innervating the nerve endings. And I will say, as a psychologist, get your sleep. Focus on your nutrition, your diet. Like, these things are not only so important for our mental health and our emotional well-being, but they're really important for our skin. And if we want to look good, sleep and stuff like that, it can't be by the wayside.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think most perimenopausal women too, and women with babies, sleep kind of defines your day. And I for sure feel like if I've not had a good night's sleep, you can see it.
Yes.
You can tell. But that's another conversation too, is cultivating sleep. How do you create and find good sleep? Because I think everybody wants it, just not always getting it. So right. I will bring another guest on to talk about sleep, because that's important. Unless, do you have any tips about sleep?
I think it would be lovely to have a guest with that, because I think it is a big topic. But the big pieces, I know it's a repetitive thing, is like, don't take your screen to bed. We know that good sleep hygiene, as we call it, means being in a fully darkened room. It means having a regular sleep time. It means having a sleep routine, just like with your little babies. When you give them a bath and you read them a story, you're gearing them down for sleep. And a lot of people are like going right to the last minute, and then they lie there and they're expecting to go into sleep mode. So have good sleep hygiene, leave the devices out, have a regular sleep time.
Yeah. And that will help you be more beautiful.
That's right.
And feel better.
That's right.
Defines my
For
day
sure.
100%. Well, that was so fantastic. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. And I'm sure our listeners, I believe, got great feedback and tips on how to cultivate more intimacy, which will bring more joy and connection into all of our lives. We just need to make it a priority before laundry.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Thank you.
And if you want to find Dr. Klein, you can reach her. You can visit her on her website, westcoastsextherapy.com. And you can follow her on social media at Dr. Carolin, Lin, Klein. So thank you for being here.